I bought a haunted doll on a whim, and it's been an interesting week. Esther, which is what the previous owner said her name was, has been here since Wednesday, and we've already had a little things happen. Most notably, if we leave lights on as we leave the house, they're off by the time we get home. Doors that were closed open just slightly, like someone is peeking inside. Doors that were open were closed. I've watched the doorknob turn and door open twice, and have been fully awake and standing at my desk at the time. There have been a few conversations between my spouse and I that all go along the lines of, "Did you come home during the day?" "Nope, I've been at work all day." "Okay, because I know I left the bathroom lights on and the door closed, and I came home to find the lights off and the door opened. The bedroom door is also open too. In my office during the winter time, I run a space heater to keep it warmer for the reptiles. I do keep the door ajar so cats and dogs can come in and out. This morning, I most certainly left the door open, as there were 3 cats and a dog in here sleeping. When I got up, I was asked if I knew that I've trapped 3 cats and a dog in my office by shutting the door. I left the door open before I went back to sleep because I knew they were in there. Oh well, the door was closed when I got up. There have been one incidence of, "Are you humming?" What? No. Someone is humming. We've also had numerous incidences of a light being turned off that we left on, and this morning I woke up to the bedroom ceiling fan being on when it had most certainly been off when I went to sleep. It takes the wall switch and pulling the light chain to have it on, and well, no lights, and I'm 100% certain I didn't do that before I went to sleep that night. Nothing scary, can't say I ever felt unsettled by any of the above, because I grew up in a house with ghosts of my great-grandmother, and I'm sort of used to things like that happening. And I'm not worried about anything actually scary happening. The woman we got the doll from was very clear that the spirit attached was a pretty nice motherly one. It was a middle-aged woman who's really interested more in plants and pets than causing troubles or scaring and playing tricks on people. The worst she does, according to the lady who sold her, is hum a random little tune and occasionally manifest physically. Or if you have plants in one area of your house, the doll might move to sit near the plants, which I haven't seen, but I have heard the humming. That's partially why I settled on that one. And just to err on the side of I don't want a doll moving around the house, we have dogs that might mistake it for a toy, I put a small garden next to her and set her near a window where she can see the garden we have in the yard. Not that it's much of a garden in the middle of winter, but you know. The most surprising part is that I am 100% uncreeped by the doll. And dolls in general leaves me feeling unsettled in general. Just a note, these things have all happened while we were fully awake and not asleep or just coming out of sleep, so sleep paralysis is an unlikely culprit. The woman in the picture. During the summer months, I was off from college. I would go work for my aunt. She is a general manager of a hotel in Rhode Island. I would sometimes go up early to help her open up the hotel and restaurant. It was closed during the winter months and opened back up in April. It was my day off, but my aunt had called me and asked if I would help with some light housekeeping around the hotel. I thought to myself, why not? Because most of the stores and bars were not open yet, so I really didn't have much to do. Here's a side note regarding the history of the hotel. This hotel was built in the 1800s, so it is pretty old. There are 4 floors and no elevator, so I was on the 2nd floor and cleaning a couple of rooms after people had checked out of them. Before I started cleaning the room, I went into the room to make sure no one was in there. As I walked into the room, there was a woman sitting on the bed. She looked really old. The way she was dressed was not from this era. I said to her, "I'm sorry, I didn't know someone was in here." The woman looked at me and said, "Don't worry, I won't be long." I told her to take as much time as she needed and I would be back later. She did not say anything and I walked out of the room and shut the door. I went on and cleaned the rest of the rooms that were left on the 2nd floor. I went back to the room and about an hour and a half later, as I walked into the room, The woman was not there, and the room had looked like no one had been there as well. As I was finishing the last couple things on my checklist, I noticed this picture that was hanging next to the exit to the room. When I looked at it, the picture, I almost passed out. The woman in the picture was the woman I saw in the room sitting on the bed about an hour ago. I stood frozen in horror for about 10 seconds. Once I was able to calm down and think clear, I ran out of the room. I never told anyone about my experience, but I know others have had similar experiences in the hotel as well. I don't think she wanted to hurt me, but it truly was a paranormal experience. Experience from my mom when I was 14. One morning in the beginning of winter, my mom asked me if I'd come into the room in the middle of the night. Being a teenager, I was like, "Mom, I'm not some 5-year-old, of course not." I thought she was just being a little weird mother, but a few days later she asked me again to make sure this time she explained why. Probably so that she didn't sound like a crazy person. She said that she had felt a deep divot in the bed that night, like somebody else was there, but my dad didn't live with us. She realized that earlier that night, she had been thinking about her long-deceased grandma, who she loved very, very much. She was also sleeping under a blanket previously owned by said grandmother. Could she have felt the ghost of her grandma that night? Is this a known phenomenon? Edit. I just talked to my mom about it. It turns out that the day following that experience was the anniversary of the grandma's death. Additionally, she hadn't, as I said earlier, already been thinking about her grandmother. The ghost who sneezed. The following happened in the winter of 06 to 07. It was a fairly dark time in my life, as I was incarcerated in a small county jail, spending the months that I had been sentenced to. I've been given the job of being a trustee, an inmate worker. Every night, it was my job to clean the hallways. One night in particular, I was being escorted by a guard back to my cell when we passed the interview room. The interview room was rarely used, and not used at night at all to my knowledge. As myself and the guard were walking past this room, I heard a very distinct, if not peculiar, achoo, what sounded like a fake sneeze. I found it odd that someone would be in the interview room sneezing at that hour. I looked for the guard for an explanation. He told me very matter-of-factly that the sneeze I heard was caused by their resident ghost. At first, I thought he was just messing with me, but he told me quite plainly that they have hearing that sneeze for years, and attributed it to a ghost. I pressed him a bit more because now my curiosity has sparked, unfortunately, but he did not reveal much of interest. Fast forward to later that week. It was late. I was alone in my cell writing a letter to a friend. I suddenly remember my encounter with a ghost, and decided to mention the small happening in the letter. No sooner had I written it on the paper that I hear this exact same achoo coming from right outside my cell. Same thing again. It sounded like a fake sneeze. There were some other strange things that happened to me there, and stranger things to other people, some of which I would be reluctant to write about, because they honestly freaked me out quite a bit as well. Anyways, just wanted to share that. Creepy old house is true to form. This won't be sufficient as I tend to lean towards exposition, but you may find it interesting if you're into this sort of thing, you know? So, back in 2008, when the whole mortgage bubble burst in Marica, our house was foreclosed on, and my parents had to find a place to rent for cheap. I just returned from a year in the UK and decided to move back in with them and my 2 younger siblings to help them out. My dad found an old farmhouse built in the late 1890s, 2 floors, 4 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, an addition from the 1950s. Tiny kitchen, dirt floor basement, you get my drift. Rent was understandably low, which was the clincher for my dad. My mom hated the place, as did I, but I guess it had its charms. My brother couldn't have cared less, but from the beginning, my sister refused to be left alone in that house. Despite the title for this post, I didn't initially find the house creepy. It was just old and a far cry from what I was used to. It wasn't until about a month after we moved inside, when I had my first experience, or whatever you want to call it, that made me feel uneasy. My brother and sister frequently went into my room to borrow DVDs and books like that, something that I was normally okay with. Now, on this particular occasion, my brother and I had an argument that morning about something arbitrary. I don't even recall what it was. What I do recall was the rage I felt when I got home from work, went into the house, walked up the stairs to the 2nd floor, and saw him running out of my room, across the hall into his room, slamming the door open. It was around 6 p.m. during the winter, and I hadn't turned the stairway lights on, nor were there any lights on upstairs. So when I say I saw my brother, I mean, I saw the shadowed form of a person running from my room to my brother's room, slamming my brother's door open in the process of doing that. So, I'm gonna flat out state that this wasn't out of the corner of my eye, or one of those flashes that turn to see and there's nothing there. That was an actual person that I was facing full on, who was actually running, audible footsteps and all, pounding from my room to my brother's room, hitting the floor and slamming it on the interior wall of his room. I ran up the last couple of stairs and went into my brother's room, flipping on the light as I went in, already yelling at him. Imagine my confusion when I realized I was yelling at no one in particular. There was no one but me inside his room. At that point, I was fuming, but also super confused at this whole experience. The room itself was small, so small that 2 steps in, you were basically standing in the middle of the room. So small that his queen-sized mattress and box spring took up the entire back wall, and didn't have a bed frame because it wouldn't fit. If he had the bed perpendicular to the wall, it would have left no room for his dresser at all. That small. At the time, the window in his room was painted shut. During the following spring, he chiseled it open. But even if he hadn't been, we were on the 2nd floor. It was highly unlikely that someone had forced open the window, removed the screen, jumped out, hovered in the air, or hung onto the windowsill, replaced the screen, fell to the ground, and ran away. Honestly, though, if the window hadn't been fully painted shut, I would have believed that was what had transpired, no matter how unlikely. Even though I was in the room seconds after the person ran inside, because that would have made more sense to me than what had actually happened. Anyways, I went to check my sister's room, then my room, but there was no one there. I didn't know what to do. I went downstairs and I wanted to tell my parents about it. When I walked into their room, under my brother and sister's room, my dad asked what all the racket upstairs had been about. They confirmed they heard running and a door slamming against the wall as well, right before they heard me yell and run into my brother's room. When I told them what happened, they confirmed that no one but them had been home, and that's when my dad picked up his pistol and went outside to check around the house. We lived on 3 unfarmed acres, surrounded by cornfields. Though being winter at the time, there was nothing but dirt. My brother brought my sister home a few hours later. They had been at a game, and when I told them what happened, my brother laughed and said it must have been a ghost, not at all meaning it though. And my sister goes, "Now you know why I don't want to be left alone here." Not long after this happened, I started having dreams of me laying in bed sleeping, being watched by someone standing in my bedroom door. That was it. That was the dream. I normally sleep through anything. I slept through tornado alarms, earthquakes, but at this place, the mice on the walls would wake me up. During the day in broad daylight, I would hear my name being called in a sing-song woman's voice. It happened at night as well, but to me, it was creepier during the day for some reason. I had conversations happening between multiple people when no one else was home. I heard pacing in the hallway outside my bedroom door. I'm not easily scared or spooked or whatever, so I don't think my imagination was working overtime. It was pissing me off more than anything. I moved out the next fall because it was driving me nutty. It was frustrating because although my mom and sister were both generally creeped out by the place, no one else was hearing or seeing anything. The dream was reoccurring frequently, and every time I had it, I'd wake up to a cold sweat. The last time was right before I moved to my new place, but it was slightly different in that the person standing by my bedroom started walking towards my bed, from the door to my bed. The moment they took the first step, I screamed myself awake and woke up my sister and one of her friends that was sleeping over. Fast forward 4 years later, my dad became very ill and was in the hospital for quite some time. I wanted to be there for them, so I moved back in with them. I got my old room. My sister had been the only child left at home for quite some time and took over my brother's old room as a closet when he moved into my room after I left. I asked her why she didn't just take the big room, and she said she felt safer in hers. The dream started again, pretty much immediately. Someone standing by the bedroom door in the dark just watching me sleep. We lived there for almost a year and a half after I moved back in. The phantom voice calling my name started up again, though this time, my mom would hear it as well. I'd be in my room, she'd be downstairs in the living room, and I'd hear my name being called, and she would hear Mom being called, and we would both meet at the bottom of the stairs, thinking the other person had called us. One of the last physical things happened last spring, right before we moved out. I was laying in bed, trying to get to sleep. Normally, sleeping is not really a problem for me, but I've been having difficulty here for a while now. I heard a knock on my bedroom door, but I didn't answer, thinking it was just my sister coming home for the night and wanting to talk. I would have been totally up for it, but my work commute made it for an early morning, so I just kept my eyes shut. I heard my door open and someone walked over to my bed. I was laying on my left side, with my back to them. They rested their hand on my hip, leaned over to give me a kiss on the cheek. I felt the weight of them and everything. Then heard them leave and shut the door. The next day, I apologized to my sister for ignoring her. She said she had no idea what I was talking about. I asked my mom, no dice. My dad couldn't do stairs at the time, but I asked him anyways. Nope. I've completed a paper on parasomnias and their potential ties to diseases, so I'm aware of sleep paralysis and its various forms. I wasn't sleeping and had full control of my faculties at the time. I was also on my side, and statistically, most sleep paralysis episodes takes place when the person is lying flat on their back. Not that it matters, because I was completely awake anyways. I turned my lights on a few minutes later and started reading. I'm a bad sister. At any rate, the family that owned the house had a few of their properties foreclosed on, so my parents had been paying rent to the bank for a few years before I moved back in. They finally decided to sell the properties and wanted to raise the house to sell it as a farmland, and we moved out last summer. One of the nights, I was there moving the rest of my things out. My sister had just left to take some more of her stuff to her new place. I told her to lock the door behind her, because I was going to be up in my room and didn't want some rando walking in and murdering me. She left and I kept packing up. About 20 minutes later, I ran down with a container of stuff, put it in the living room to take out later. Then went back up to get another container. I was walking through the door to my room when I heard my name being called from the living room. I stopped and stood there because it was so loud, unreal loud and echoey since the house was practically empty. And I thought I must be going crazy, and then I heard it again. I ran downstairs. Well, the last bit of my name was still resonating in the hall, and there was no one there. I checked the front and side doors. They were locked. My sister's car was gone, but I called her anyways and asked her if she had been inside the house. She said no. But are you really surprised? There were things that happened there that I cannot explain without sounding Looney Tunes, but they happened. I don't believe in ghosts, per se. so I won't tell people I've experienced that kind of activity. I don't feel like that kind of activity. It felt like very real people anyways, people with density and matter and stuff like that. People who are not part of my family walking around and talking in the house. Why I experienced the brunt of it, I'll never know. But I'm glad it's gone. Nana visits to say goodbye. My two youngest children, at the time of this incident, about 4 and 6 years old, woke me up very early one morning shivering, uncontrollably and crying. It was a winter morning and their rooms is in the basement, so I just assumed they were cold and tried to comfort them. Eventually I was able to understand that their Nana had just visited them to tell them that they were good boys and should listen to their dad. At that point, I was divorcing their mom and fighting for custody. She told them she was going away, to a place far away. I got angry. I thought she had just made her way into the house and awakened my kids without talking to me at all. That was weird. While I was stomping around the house, the boys kept telling me over and over again that Nana was gone. A little while later, their mom called me in tears. Her mom, Nana, had died very early that morning